Hello everyone, I'm Jeremy from the Synology UK Business Development team, and welcome to another Synology Partner online training. So the topic for today is Synology Directory Server. That's again another very important package. When we often talk about Synology become a business file server, being able to run your domain controller on the Synology with all the key features is really one essential aspect. Now, just to clarify, in terms of the naming, this was previously known as the AD server. So it's actually a package which is quite mature. I think it was launched in 2017, and it's just last year that we renamed it, mainly to avoid confusion. AD being for Active Directory, it could create confusion as to whether it was by Microsoft, by Synology. So we've clarified that, and moving forward, you'll be knowing it as Synology Directory Server. So it's an Active Directory powered by Samba, obviously, DSM being based on Linux. If you're not familiar with Active Directory, just a brief overview. So as I mentioned, it allows your Synology to become a domain controller. From an IT administrator perspective, what are the benefits? Well, when you have a large number of computers and users to manage, you're often going to be wanting to typically create a group policies, which means that you'll be able to automate a lot of tasks. Let's take a look at two examples. In an organization, you often have different teams that need to have different type of access privileges to the same folder or file, for instance. Some may be allowed to edit, some to only view. You can easily apply those settings through the group policies. Another aspect is, when new employees come on board, you may need to install certain applications, map certain folders, and obviously if you can automate that and not have to do it every single time when you set up the computer for the new employee, that saves a lot of time and makes the life of our IT administrators much more easy and productive. So there are other aspects, typically from the perspective of the user. Imagine you have a mail server, a file server, potentially a backup server. You will not want to have a separate set of credentials for the users to access each one. So you'll want to have a single sign-on. This is something that a domain controller is going to allow you to do. And also, you'll probably have some users who will log into various workstations. Having a common profile, so a roaming profile, means that they won't need to transfer files on every single machine individually. So what are we going to be looking at today? There's really a lot of things in Active Directory, but we'll start with the setup of the Synology Directory Server. We'll take a look at the features from within the directory server in the DSM interface, but we'll also take a look at the RSAT tool. So that is what you have when you're within Windows, and obviously on a day-to-day basis, IT administrators use RSAT. So since we fully support it, we'll take a look at what can be done with it, and more specifically, we'll zoom into group policies and organizational units. And finally, we'll take a look at more typically the integration with DSM applications, and we'll go over disaster recovery scenario. So the setup, that is really one of the key benefits, is that Synology Directory Server is extremely simple to set up. You'll take a look at the demo, but within 2 minutes we'll have it set up, and it takes a lot of the settings in the background. It automates that for you, so it makes it extremely simple to handle. Before you start, so this is taken from the help file, but 3 key aspects that you will want to check. Make sure that the NAS, the Synology that's going to be hosting the directory server, has got a static IP address. The second point, if you're already joined to a domain, unjoin it. And finally, if you have another domain on the local area network, that could create conflicts and issues. So 3 points to check before you get started. So we're going to take a look at the setup. So not just installing and setting up the package, but going through creating a user account, and more importantly, joining the actual workstation, a Windows machine, to the domain. So 3 steps for this demo. Let's get started.
So let's get started. You can see we have Synology Directory Server here.
So we're going to start by taking a look at the setup. There'll be 3 phases in the demo: getting the package, pretty much set up the domain setup. Then we'll just create a user, and we'll finish by actually joining the workstation, the actual physical Windows machine, to the domain. So 3 different parts. We're in our destination manager. We've already downloaded Synology Directory Server from the package center. You'll note when you do that at the same time it installs the DNS server. Obviously both work together, and it's also going to perform some settings automatically in the background. When you launch Directory Server, it's going to take you through a wizard. Really, there aren't many steps. It's a very straightforward process. You start by defining your domain name. So we're going to take the example of we're setting up a Synology University. So let's call it synouni.com. You set up your work group. It automatically takes the name from above, and then you define the administrator. Password. There are some strength rules for security. Just confirmed passwords, and that'll be the main step for the creation of your domain. So that's extremely simple. And obviously it's just going to be a few seconds of creation, but in the background it's actually performing a lot of the settings. So once that's done, we'll be able to take a look at the interface, and also check what's happened on the DNS server package. So you can see here you have the status page, and it indicates if there are any records which you may need to investigate to update. Here, none are needed. You have a user and computers tab, so you can see all the users and groups, which you could also potentially create more to have again more flexibility on what you'll be doing with the domain controller. So users, computers, none have been joined yet, and a section for domain controllers. Domain policy, again around password and lockout. There are a few that you can define again for security straight from the DSM interface. We're going to take a look at the DNS server. So 2 records created, notably an MS DCS record. So the purpose here is not to go over the whole DNS server package, but typically if you want to have control over, again, what performance impact it might have, you have aspects like the maximum cache size, number of TCP connections that can be controlled. So that's really it. Default settings all handled upon installation and setup of the directory server and its domain. Second part of the setup. So we have an admin account created by default, and we'll also just go through a manual creation. And again, we'll do that right from the interface of Directory Server in DSM. So synouni.com, there are the 3 sections listed underneath. So select user and go to add. You can create new users, new groups, and also import them directly if you have them created. I believe there's a format for the spreadsheet. We'll go through the manual creation. I'm going to call this user Jerem, and obviously you can also set an email. That's quite useful if ever, for instance, you needed to reset the password. It gives independence for the user to do that. Confirm the password that you're giving. By default, you probably want to leave this option to force the password creation at the next login, but to simplify the demo, I'm just going to remove it. Select which groups you want that user to be part. For instance, you could add them to DNS administrators group. For the demo here, we're just going to add it to the designated admins for the domain controller. Again, it will simplify our demo. And you can see Jerem has been created. It's appearing here at the bottom of the list. So that's it for the creation of a user. We're going to finish now with, probably the key part, it's joining the workstation to the domain. And here we're going to be doing this from the actual control panel of the Windows machine itself, and notably taking a look at the network adapter settings, which will need to be changed before you can go any further. So here we've done everything we need to in the package interface of Synology Directory Server. We'll head over to the control panel, the Windows control panel, and you're going to be looking for the system section, and that's where you change typically the domain which the machine is going to be joined to. Note that you need to have a Windows Pro version to be able to join a domain. This is really a business feature. Rename this computer or change its domain. So this is where you'll do this. Select domain and then enter synouni.com. Now before you do that, if you were to go ahead right away, you would find the connection, the joining to actually be rejected. What you need to do is note the IP address of the domain controller, of your DNS, sorry, 10.0.4.120, and then head to the network settings and change the adapter options. And what you're going to want to do is have the Ethernet connection IPv4 properties, specifically the DNS address pointing to 10.0.4.120. So it's the only network setting to change, but make sure it's done, otherwise your joining of the domain will fail. Let's close these windows and go back to the domain change. So we've entered the domain name, and now when we enter the actual username, so Jerem, and the password, this is actually going to now allow us to have this specific machine joined to the domain. Let's give it a few seconds for the authentication. Okay, welcome to synouni.com. And I believe, yes, you're going to need to restart the computer before you can go any further. So we'll go ahead with that, and we'll check that it's been actually joined in a few seconds. But first, I just want to mention what we'll be doing in the next demo, and that's looking at RSAT tools, so remote server administration tools. They are within Microsoft Windows Pro, and they obviously allow you to manage a Windows server, of which an important component are the Active Directory modules. So what we'll do in the next demo is go over the installation, the activation of RSAT, and then we'll do the user creation from RSAT, so not just from DSM but also from RSAT as a quick demo. Here we are back in our Windows machine. We're going to check that we are logged in with this account. So go to account settings, and you can see here synouni/jerem. We've given administrator privileges to this account. That means we'll be able to typically use the Active Directory modules and create a few group policies later on in the demo. Let's close this. Now, this is the DSM with Directory Server. Now I mentioned you have all the essential features here, but there are more that can be done with the RSAT tool. So we're going to go ahead and download that from the Microsoft website. Let's just Google it, and there's a few different pages. But there's a quite neat one with so under support, Microsoft support. It also goes over a bit of an intro and notably a tutorial, because there are some Windows features that you'll need to enable before you can actually gain access to them. The name has changed for the option to enable. We'll check that in a second. So if you haven't installed RSAT, go ahead with the download link. We've already installed it, so we'll go ahead to the control panel and identify, so it's under programs, it's turn Windows features on or off. Now previously it would have been listed under remote server tools. In recent versions it's changed and it's Active Directory Lightweight Services, so enable that option And once that's done, you'll be able to fire up the RSAT modules, and notably the Active Directory related ones. So just look for Windows Administrative Tools, open this, and you have all the different modules listed. So all the Active Directory ones, we'll be taking a closer look at users and computers, very important module, as well as group policy management a little bit later on. So those are really the two that we'll be focusing on. Let's open users and computers. So you can see we're connected to synology.com, and if you scroll down you can see I've created a few additional users. Again, for our example, we want to have a few students, a few teachers. Let's go ahead and create a second teacher. So right click on users, new, and then it's pretty obvious, select user at the bottom of the list. So we'll go ahead, create a second teacher. Just a few seconds over that. What we're going to be looking to do here is we'll have different groups, a group of students, a group of teachers, and apply different policies to them. Okay, we're just completing the creation of this user, enter the password. Just like in the DSM interface when we're creating the user, we're not going to ask to change at the next logon. So make sure that your passwords match, otherwise it's going to be rejected. Let's just re-enter it and we should be good to go. Okay, there we are. So we've got our second user, teacher2, created. And we should be good to go with our next demo. Now, I just mentioned I was going to create two groups. Actually, I just want to clarify two aspects. So this is not actually directly related to Synology Directory Server. It's a general concept in Active Directory by Microsoft. But you have two concepts. It's two concepts which are groups and organizational units, or OUs, which we'll be referring to in the rest of the demo. Now, they're a bit different. I highly recommend, if you're going to be using Active Directory, that you read into it to fully grasp the differences. But basically, a group is a collection of users or computers and nothing else. A group can be a member of other groups, one or multiple ones, so there's quite a bit of flexibility there. And in general, groups are used for security settings, typically being able to control what the users part of a group will be able to access in terms of resources like shared folders or applications. So it's fairly restricted. OUs are a little bit different. So an organizational unit organizational units are really going to be mapping the actual organization, typically the teams, the departments within your organization. The important difference is that an organizational unit can contain not just users and computers, but also other groups, other OUs, and an OU can only be part of one other OU. So it's really you'll see in the example it becomes a tree structure, and so these are used to apply to groups, users, computers, entire policies, not just specific access settings. So we'll take a look at the whole process all the way to the creation of a group policy, but we'll start by creating our organizational units. So again, that's going to be very straightforward. In our example, we'll have a kind of a general organizational unit called Synology University members. Then we'll have two other OUs nested under it, one for students, one for teachers, and then we'll create later on two different distinct policies. So we're back in our Active Directory users and computers module. So you can see still connected to synology.com. Right click on it and again go to new. That's where you create everything. Choose organizational unit. It's very simple, just give it a name. You have an option to protect from accidental deletion. I'm I'm going to delete it just for the sake of the demo. That's completely up to you. Double click on this new OU that you've created and go ahead and create two other ones which are going to again be nested inside of it. So you can really see here the tree structure. You wouldn't be able to have an OU part of multiple other ones. Okay, so creation of the teacher's OU, and that should be done on the on that side of things. Now what we're going to do is head back to our user section, so you can see JRM, student 1, student 2, teacher 1, teacher 2, and we're going to actually move these into the right organizational unit. And once they've been moved there, well, that means that you'll be able to start applying policies, and those policies will apply to those users. So here we go, let's select that. One thing I want to clarify here is obviously we're within RSAT, so this is not something specific to Synology Directory Server, but Synology Directory Server fully supports this, and the beauty of it is that you can perform all this management from RSAT without needing to go to the DSM interface. Okay, so we've moved all our users into their respective OUs, and notably Jerem, the user I'm currently logged in, I've added him as a student. So what we'll be doing a little bit later on is create some policies, and we'll see if they actually apply to this account. So group policies, we'll do two. One, which will be quite simple, restricting the control panel for any student within our organization. And then the second one you can see will be changing the wallpaper and automatically mapping drives for any teacher. So until now we've been using the users and computers module. Now let's open group policy management. So again, you can see connected to synouni.com. You can see our organizational unit. Syno University is showing with its two sub OUs just underneath. If you click on students, well, you can see some key information around linked GPOs, group policy inheritance. Just created it, so there's nothing important to check here. If you want to create an actual group policy object, so go to the OU, right click on it and create GPO, give it a name. Since there are none other created, you won't be able to link it to anything. Once that's created, then select it and click edit. Now you can see here there's two main groups. There's computer configurations and user configurations. Obviously, computer related to the machine users is going to apply to the actual account. And underneath you've got two sets, so policies and preferences. So we said that we wanted to do something to the control panel, restrict it. Basically that is based on your own experience with RSAT. You can look around for it or just Google it. So there are software settings, Windows settings. It's not there, it's under administrative template. You can see control panel, desktop, network. So there's really a lot of things that you can do. There are hundreds of items. And if you go to control panel, you'll see you can hide specific control panel items. What we want to do is actually prohibit access to the entire control panel and even PC settings. So launch it, enable it. You can add comments, which can be quite handy. You've got some literature, tells you what the user is going to see. Here it's an on or off type of setting, so there are no options to further configure. So we've enabled disabling the control panel. What we're going to do now is test it. We could simply go back, log in, log out, or what you can choose to do, since a JRM is joined to this student OU, you can run in the command line gp update, so group policy update / force. So that is just going to take a few seconds, update all the policies which apply to the account. Okay, so that's just completed. And if you try and launch the control panel, let's see what happens. you get a message that you have been restricted, and you would need to contact your system administrator. So that seems to have been a success for our first policy created, and obviously if we'd logged in with the other two accounts, student accounts, we'd have had the same thing. So as we mentioned, changing the wallpaper, mapping the drive, that's going to be applied to the teachers in the organization. So let's go ahead with that. It'll be the same flow. You go to Group Policy Management, you select Teachers, and we'll go over the same creation of a group policy object. So let's close Students, open Teachers, nothing's been created yet. Create a GPO and link it here. Name, since we're going to do drive mapping and wallpaper change, let's give it a fairly straightforward name. Here we go, select your policy, edit it, and here the same thing. So we're going to start with the wallpaper. That is also under user configuration, policies, admin templates. Locate desktop. So again, quite a few things you can do, but if you select desktop wallpaper, again, enable it, put a comment if you want. Here you're actually going to have some options. It's not just an on or off setting. You're going to have to say, well, what wallpaper are you going to be pointing to? I've already downloaded something. It's on the on our actual server that's hosting the directory service, and it's an image of a 1618 plus. Now, I could just point to it, but you need to make sure that the user actually has access to that shared folder. So we're going to do that right away in DSM. Under shared folder, permissions, select the domain users. Don't just do the local users, that won't be useful. Go to the domain users and select the two teachers, 1 and 2. And now that you've given read-write access, then if you point to that image, it's actually going to be able to read it and update it. Select the path and then head back to your group policy. Here we go, and enter the server IP, name of the share, image.jpg. You also have an option to control the wallpaper style, but just like in the regular Windows settings, so you can center, fill, fit, just choose what you want to apply. And now that all that has been set, you can go ahead apply this first part of the policy. We're also going to, we said map a drive, so that is, again, based on experience, you look for it. It's under the preferences, not the policies. Okay, locate drive maps under Windows settings and create a new mapped drive. So here, a few options. I suggest using update, so it doesn't just do it on creation, but every time you log in, it's going to update the content. Give the location of the share, so we're going to do the same one, which is actually containing our 1618 plus image that I showed you a little bit earlier on. Select reconnect and also give it a friendlier name. Let's call it teachers files. Select a name for the drive, a letter, so that's done, and make sure that drives are going to show. We've got a few extra options under common, but we don't need to modify anything here. So we've got our policy created for both the wallpaper and the drive mapping. Now we need to actually reconnect to a user which is part of the teachers OU. So we're going to do that. And we're back. So we are under our account info. You can see we're connected as Synology Uni Teacher 1. Let's close this, and you can see that seems to have worked. The wallpaper has actually been updated. Second item to check is so under the File Explorer, have we got a mapped drive? Yes, it's the Q drive, teacher files, and well, we can see our PowerPoint as well as our DS1618 image. Let's create another file. Okay, so this group policy seems to have been successfully applied, and that is what we were looking to do. So there's obviously a lot of things that you can do with Active Directory. These were just two fairly simple and straightforward examples, but just to kind of go over the entire flow from installing the directory server on the Synology, getting the domain set up, and then actually creating a policy and applying it to different organizational units within your organization. So I've touched on this already, but this is really important for office productivity. I've already mentioned the single sign-on. We'll actually take a look at that a little bit more in detail in the next in the next demo. But also roaming profiles. It's quite important that if, for instance, our teacher one were to get a new laptop or log in at home, typically over VPN, remote logging back into the office, as long as he's joining using his domain profile, well, he'll be able to see that shared folder already mapped and any other policies which have been applied. Now, obviously, it's important that a Synology Directory Server actually integrates with other apps, and notably the Synology productivity tools. That's a key part of this idea of having a business file server. So if you're running Calendar, Chat, Mail Plus, NoteStation, Office, all of these which are going to be able to leverage the domain users that you'll have created. So in the next demo, we could have gone with, I don't know, doing something with Office or Mail Plus. We've chosen a bit of a different scenario, a bit more around disaster recovery. So what's the idea here? Often we get customers who are looking to have quite a good uptime between two of their servers. If one of the passive server goes down, the primary server goes down, there'll be a secondary one to take over. Now you have an option, it's to go with the HA, the high availability setup. It does have one constraint. It means that both servers need to be identical. But you may already have two Synology servers which are of different models. Now, as long as they support snapshot replication and that you don't actually need to have the entire system configurations synced in real time, but you just want to have data synchronized, well, you can actually rely on snapshot replication, which will take a snapshot up to every 5 minutes. And so what's the idea here? Well, if your primary server were to go down, you'd enter the failover mode. That means that on the secondary server, the files would no longer be locked, but become read-write. You'd be able to just reallocate the IP of the original server onto the new one, and what your goal would be is that your users would just log in seamlessly to the new server. So that would work as long as the set of accounts on each machine are the same. And so that is where being able to join both units to the same domain controller is going to come in handy and provide you with a seamless disaster recovery solution for your setup. So what we're going to do in the next demo is have our two servers joined to the domain controller and kind of simulate this scenario that I've just showed you. Now, one thing you'll notice is that, again, just for the simplicity of the setup, I have the domain controller running on the primary server. Obviously, in a real case, in your real infrastructure, you would want to make sure that the domain controller is not hosted on one of the two servers. You really want to have the file server nodes separate from that running the domain controller. So what are we going to do? First, we'll join our secondary server to the domain. We will assign user permissions to the folder, and then we'll do the failover and make sure that we can log in seamlessly. So one thing to clarify is we're using snapshot replication. So when we're in the interface, I'll show you what's been set up. Well, pretty much we will be protecting this same shared folder that I've been using previously, the DC shared folder, and replicating it from the primary unit to the second one. So you can see here we have the original DC host, which we've been using, and a secondary server, so it's a different one. It's a DS718 Plus, and it's called Snapshot Backup. So those are the two servers that we'll be using for the demo. This is Snapshot Backup that we're currently logged into with the 4.125 IP. If we go back to the DC host, our primary server with the original data, and open Snapshot Replication, you can see the replication is already set up and replicating to Snapshot Backup. So fairly simple setup. If you go to Snapshot Backup, you can see that a DC shared folder has been created and it's automatically set into read-only. So that's a feature of Snapshot Replication to make sure users aren't going to delete your backup files. If you were to open Snapshot Replication on the other end, you're actually able to get some recovery options, so switch over, force failover, or even just perform a test failover. So if we head over to the users, you can see that we don't have any of the ones JRM, Teacher1, Teacher2. So if you wanted these to be available for this secondary unit, go to Domain LDAP, and you're going to join the domain that was created. So go to so enter the domain name, so synouni.com, one that we created earlier. Your DNS server, so set it to 10.0.4.120, and again you've got a few other options. Again, here we don't need to modify them for this demo, but the options, the advanced options, can be activated if needed. Enter the admin password, and that should start the joining of the domain. So this part can take a little bit longer, generally 2-3 minutes. It's actually going to be running some tests in the background. So what we're going to do is skip this and take a look at what you're going to see. So we'll take a look at the results of the tests, and then we're going to start assigning the right user permissions for this DC shared folder. So you can see here the domain status check, everything has been checked and the status is good. So that means we can now go ahead, and we're on the secondary unit, the target unit, and under domain users you can now see well, administrator, JRM, student 1, student 2, teacher 1, teacher 2. So all of these are now available, and we can apply permissions on the actual shared folder. So this is on the target shared folder. Select the domain users, and yeah, we just want to resize that. We're going to do the demo with JRM and set his access to read-write on this specific shared folder. Click OK, and here we go. So now what we need to do is go ahead with well, pretty much our failover, which means that this shared folder on the target unit will be automatically set to read-write by snapshot replication. Failover and continued access. So snapshot backup our target unit. As mentioned, it's still in read-only mode. We need to go over to snapshot replication, recovery, and perform either a failover or here a test failover. That means a separate identical shared folder will be created just for test. Okay, you can choose which version you want to restore from. Just takes a few seconds for the cloning of the folder. And if you go back to the control panel and refresh, you'll now see a second one, identical, called DC test, and this one is in read-write mode. Obviously the users that have access to DC will also have access to DC test, so we don't need to do anything there. If you did want to change the IP, you'd do that at this stage, but here, since we haven't actually powered off or killed the original one, we will just log into the same 125 IP. Now, in incognito mode, so that we can actually log in with a different account, JRM. If you wanted, you could actually leave the domain name /, but by default, DSM will actually check which domains it's logged into and if there's a user matching, so you don't even need to enter that in the username. So let's open the file station. We can see we have access to those two shared folders with this user, and the content is there, content we created a bit earlier. In the test one, you can actually delete, and under DC, if you try doing that, it's going to tell you that you don't have access, you don't have the right permissions. So again, that's more of a disaster recovery scenario. If your primary server goes down, well, your users will have access on the secondary server as long as both machines are joined to the same domain and the user accounts are shared. So we're nearing the end of this webinar. Synology Directory Server, what have we seen, what have we looked into today? First, the setup. That is probably, if you've set up a domain controller before, I think you can feel just how simple it is to get set up, and all these settings which are done in the background for you, notably on and linking with the DNS server. The integration with the RSAT tools, which, let's be honest, are what IT admins use on a day-to-day basis. And again, that's really one of the reasons why we're not including them on the DSM interface. You've only got the standard basics, the essentials there. Because most IT admins will be using RSAT anyway. We had a look at OUs, organizational units, and group policies, and this example where we applied different policies to students and to teachers, more restrictive ones for students. And then integration with other apps. So again, all our productivity apps tie in with the Synology Directory Server, but also with snapshot replication for this disaster recovery scenario. Now, you might have questions around, what Synology can run Synology Directory Service. The general rule is that it does require a bit of processing power and notably a bit of RAM. RAM does have an impact, notably on the total number of concurrent connections or number of groups that can be joined. So it's in general, units from our Plus series, it does require to have an Intel chip and I believe something like 2 gigs of RAM. The lowest powered model that can run that is the DS218, so 2-bay dual core model. Now, in terms of maximum object support, if you're from within the DSM UI, it's 2000. Another benefit of RSAT, it's up to 20,000. Maximum number of groups 50. Maximum number of concurrent connections 2000. Now note that these numbers depend on the actual unit itself. If you were wanting to spec out a project with a Synology acting as a domain controller, do get in touch with us. We've got quite a bit of data on that. Our HQ has done a lot of testing, and I mentioned earlier the amount of RAM does have an impact. So if you're looking at the DS218 Plus or the DS718 Plus, if you go with the bog standard 2 gigs of RAM, I think you'll have 100 concurrent connections, but if you scale up to 6 gigs of RAM, it goes up to 300. So again, any questions, just contact us and we'll be happy to help out on that. Before we finish the webinar, it's important that we talk about having kind of redundancy and protection of your directory server. If the unit happened to go down, you want to be able to get up and running again, because if your domain controller is down, it's going to impact your organization. So first, in terms of backup, not just of the data, but the whole Synology Directory Server package configurations, that can be done with Hyper Backup. So create a Hyper Backup task and select the Directory Server package. Now, that would mean that you could bring in a new Synology unit and restore from your backup and have Synology Directory Server ready to go. If you really want to minimize the amount of downtime, that would be done through the high availability package. So you'd run high availability between two identical Synology units, have a DSM hosting the Directory Server package on top of that. And that means that if the active server goes down, the passive server takes over within a matter of 30 seconds to a minute at most. Now, we often get requests around making it in a way easier to sync, maybe not having an entire DSM, but just the package itself, or even potentially with another domain controller, not necessarily hosted on a Synology. And for that, DSM7 is going to include quite a few enhancements, notably syncing with a secondary domain controller, so not at the DSM level, but more at the package level. And again, we'll wait for the exact specs of DSM7. There's a preview coming out in just a few weeks, early February, but you should be able to do synchronization with a non-Synology hosted domain controller, meaning that could potentially be used for migration purposes. So DSM7 should be quite an exciting update for anyone who's looking for updates on the Directory Server package. Now, I mentioned there's really a lot that can be done, either from the RSAT side of things. Again, that probably isn't so relevant because there are other resources on the web, and it's not something that's specifically tied to Synology. But potentially in terms of the integration with other apps, might consider another webinar in the future. I just want to flag some interesting resources. One from our US team back in December. Cody did a similar webinar, so he went over what was common, the setup process, but then there was a bit more around the roaming profiles and the installation of an application, if my memory is correct. So do check out his webinar. And also we have a lot of tutorials. There's also a great help file. So if you're looking into Directory Server, don't hesitate to read all that, or just get in touch with us and we'll do our best to help you out. So that's the end of the webinar for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative, and we hope to see you on the next one. Have a nice day.